Welcome to PBCJ's coverage of the sitting of the Senate. I'm Simone Absalom, and I'll provide a brief outline of what's expected to take place during the sitting. But before we begin, did you know that a motion means a proposal by a senator that the Senate thereof or a committee do something, order something to be done, or express an opinion concerning some matter? On the agenda today, under Public Business, notice of a resolution to extend the state of emergency in St. James under the Emergency Powers Act and suspension of the standing orders to enable the resolution to be taken through all its stages. On Tuesday, the House of Representatives, the lower house, voted in favor of a resolution put forward by Prime Minister Andrew Holness to extend the state of public emergency in St. James until May 2. Now, the resolution, which falls under the Emergency Powers Act, also includes the suspension of all the standing orders to enable the resolution to be taken through all its stages. The Jamaican Constitution requires that 2/3 of the members of the Houses of Parliament must approve the motion. Of the 63 members of the lower house, 51 voted in favor, while 11 members were absent. The Senate is expected to approve, also by 2/3 majority, the extension of the state of emergency, which will begin right after midnight. Senators will also be debating the following legislations. The bill shortly entitled the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2017. The bill shortly entitled the Indictment Amendment Act 2017. And that's what's on the agenda. It should be noted, though, that elements of the day's agenda can be changed or moved. But before we go, here are a few things you need to bear in mind if you plan to attend the session at Gordon House. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card from the office of the clerk. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during a suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. No photography, videography, or sketching of the proceedings is allowed, unless so authorized by the presiding officer. And there should be no smoking inside the parliamentary building. Now over to the proceedings.
And his accomplishments over a short period of time, having received his doctorate, written a book, and now this award. I am duly proud of him, and so are all of the members of the opposition. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Morris, you wanted to respond?
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate and all the members of the Senate for their good wishes, and to say that, you know, I'm deeply honored and humbled by the award that is being bestowed on me by the Gleaner in recognition of my achievements at the UWI Center for Disability Studies, the completion of the PhD, and also the publication of the autobiography. And I want to say that it is a recognition for my contribution in terms of education. And Minister, you know, you have been an advocate and a champion for education for years. And we know that education is, I'm talking about the Minister of Education in this instance. The fact of the matter is that we know that education is a major means of social empowerment and transformation. And my life is a perfect testimony to that. And it just shows Jamaicans that we need to stop complaining and just capitalize on the opportunities that are there in our society. Because irrespective of the difficulties that confront us as a society, the truth is that we can use the existing educational structures and become successful. And that is a part of my mission to say to every Jamaican, We can do it, irrespective of who you are, irrespective of where you're from, irrespective of the circumstances that confront you. You can use the existing educational system and become successful. Mr. President, Minister, this is leader of government business now. I want to indicate to you that I'm going to be popping out, as the President pointed out, at about 11:25, but I am on standby. I'm committed to making sure that that particular resolution is approved and you get the support today. All right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All of you, or certainly most of you, are perhaps painfully aware that I was in Cuba recently with, with my constant barrage of photographs, etc. But I had the occasion to meet with Esteban Lasso, who is the president of the Assembly and a friend of Jamaica. He asked me, in fact, to convey his regards to a number of people, including former Prime Minister Pattison. But he indicated that I should pass his best regards to the members of the Senate and to indicate that following their elections in April, he hopes not only to visit us, but to develop a closer relationship between the Parliament of Jamaica and the Cuban Assembly. And it is something that he is hoping that he'll be able to translate into a vehicle of cooperation throughout the CARICOM region. So I offer his compliments. I got a beautiful book as a gift, which I will hand to the clerk to place in the Library of the Parliament. Thank you very much. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Annual Report of the Land Administration and Management Program, LAMP Fund, for the year 2009-2010. Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements for the Jamaica Social Investment Fund for the year 2016-2017. The Emergency Powers Continuation Resolution 2018 under the Emergency Powers Act.
Thank you. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives to the Honourable Senate. I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 30th day of January 2018, the following bills were passed in the House of Representatives. A bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of an Agency of Government. A bill entitled An Act to Make More Comprehensive Provisions for the Appointment, Jurisdiction and Conduct of Justices of the Peace and for Connected Matters, passed with 27 amendments. A bill entitled An Act to Provide for Courts of Petty Sessions to be renamed Lay Magistrates Courts, to amend the Judicature Parish Court Act accordingly, and to provide for connected matters. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Child Care and Protection Act, and a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act, signed Pernell P. Charles, CD, JP, MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Petitions. Papers. Yes, I'm sorry. Recommitting bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives. Minister.
Mr. President, I beg to signify my willingness to take charge of the bills.
A bill shortly entitled The Justices of the Peace Act 2018, read a first time. A bill shortly entitled The Renaming of the Courts of Petty Sessions Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2018. A bill shortly entitled the Child Care and Protection Act, Amendment Act 2018, read the first time. A bill shortly entitled the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Amendment Act 2018, read the first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bills.
Thank you, Minister. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following three motions. The Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority Act, the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority Regulations 2018 Resolution, whether Section 37 of the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authorities Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the authority may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations for the purpose of giving effect to the provisions of the Act, and whereas subsection 4 of Section 37 of the Act provides that regulations made under subsection 1 of the section shall be subject to affirmative resolution, and whereas the authority, with the approval of the Minister responsible for agriculture, on the 10th day of January 2018, made the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authorities Regulations 2018, and whereas it is desirable that the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority Regulations 2018 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority Regulations 2018 Resolution. 2. The Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authorities Regulations 2018, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 26th day of January 2018, are hereby affirmed. And 2. The Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authorities CES Regulation 2018 Resolution, whereas Section 37 of the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the authority may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations for the purpose of giving effect to the provisions of the Act, and whereas subsection 4 of Section 37 of the Act provides that regulations made under subsection 1 of the section shall be subject to affirmative resolution, and whereas the authority, with the approval of the Minister responsible for agriculture on the 10th day of January 2018, made the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority CES Regulations 2018, and whereas it is desirable for the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority CES Regulations 2018 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority CES Regulations 2018 Resolution. 2. The Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority CES Regulations, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 26th day of January 2018, are hereby affirmed. So it's not laid on the table of the Senate, they were laid on the, I think there's an issue there. 3. The Emergency Powers Act. The Emergency Powers Continuation Resolution 2018. Whereas by virtue of Section 21 and 2B of the Constitution of Jamaica, the Governor General may make a proclamation declaring that a state of public emergency exists if satisfied that action has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person or body of persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the public safety. And whereas the Governor General was satisfied that a state of public emergency existed as a result of the aforementioned circumstances, and whereas on the 18th day of January 2018, the Governor General by proclamation declared that a state of public emergency exists in the parish of St. James, and further declared that the said proclamation shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period not exceeding 3 months, as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House. And whereas it is provided by Section 23 of the Constitution of Jamaica that a proclamation made by the Governor General for the purposes of and in accordance with that section shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period, not exceeding 3 months, as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House. And whereas, under the provisions of Section 3(1) of the Emergency Powers Act, it is lawful for the Governor-General during a state of public emergency, by order, to make regulations for securing the essentials of life to the community. And whereas the Governor-General, in exercise of the powers conferred upon him by Section 3(1) of the Emergency Powers Act, made the Emergency Powers Regulations 2018 for securing the essentials of life to the parish of St. James during the state of public emergency. And whereas Section 3(4) of the Emergency Powers Act provides that any regulation so made shall be laid before the Senate and House of Representatives as soon as may be after they are made, and shall not continue in force after the expiration of 7 days from the time they are so laid before the Senate and the House of Representatives, whichever shall be the later, unless a resolution is passed by the Senate and House of Representatives providing for the continuance thereof. And whereas the Emergency Powers Regulations 2018 were laid in the House of Representatives on the 23rd day of January 2018, and in the Senate on the 26th day of January 2018, and whereas it is desirable that a. the state of public emergency declared as aforementioned should remain in force for 3 months until the 2nd day of May 2018, and b. the Emergency Powers Regulations 2018 continue in force after the expiration of 7 days from the time of later laying as aforesaid, and until the expiration of the state of public emergency. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Emergency Powers Continuance Resolution 2018. 2. The state of public emergency declared by the Governor-General by proclamation on the 18th day of January 2018 shall remain in force for 3 months until the 2nd day of May 2018. 3. The Emergency Powers Regulations 2018, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 1st day of February 2018, are hereby continued into force until the 2nd day of May 2018. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the last mentioned motion.
Thank you, Minister. Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. President, might I advise the Senate, and in particular the members of the opposition, that we are prepared with answers to the question at numbered 7 on the notice of questions paper, but we would ask for suspension of standing orders to take the questions after 11:45, noting the agenda which is before us, and also that the member who wished the question answered is not present. If he is unable to make it in time, then we can simply table them, but we would offer him the courtesy as it had been delayed for some time.
Thank you, Minister. I wonder if you would just have a brief word with the clerk.
Mr. President, if I might crave the indulgence of members, just to correct the third item in the resolution just read, the last mentioned resolution. And this would be to say that the Emergency Powers Regulations 2018, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 26th day of January 2018, are hereby continued in force until the 2nd day of May 2018, because, of course, we had tabled the regulations last week.
Thank you, Minister. So in relation to the questions and answers, you have gotten an understanding from the Leader of Opposition Business. So if required, we will recommit them. Yeah? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to take the motion of which I gave notice earlier, and then to proceed to take the companion bills, the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act and the Indictment Amendment Act thereafter, and we can take the questions thereafter, hopefully, or before, depending on what happens in terms of attendance. And with that, Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to allow me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the Minister to take the motion, notice of which was given earlier. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it.
Mr. President, we are all aware that 2017 saw the number of murders in the parish of St. James standing at 335, and that January 2018 numbers were trending ahead of last year. 335 Jamaican lives taken in that parish alone. Mr. President, given the level of criminality and the likelihood that it would not be curtailed without extraordinary measures, His Excellency, the Governor-General, was requested to proclaim, and did so proclaim, a state of public emergency effective January 18, 2018. Mr. President, our laws provide that the Governor-General may declare a state of public emergency for a period not exceeding 14 days, that an extension of the period must be approved by both Houses of Parliament by resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of the members of each House, and that the extended period of the state of public emergency may last for a period not exceeding 3 months. The level of serious criminality, including murders, assaults, shooting, extortion, lotto scamming, trafficking in guns and drugs, and other illicit business, are evidence, Mr. President, of an ecosystem of crime which is well-resourced and interconnected with broad reach in St. James through a network of facilitators who benefit. Mr. President, the state of emergency, in effect, gives the security forces powers to detain, powers to search premises, vehicles, and persons without a warrant, powers to stop and question persons, and powers to seize property. It allows them to control public gatherings and movement. These enhanced powers, Mr. President, allow the security forces to bring high levels of violence under control and also to prevent the movement of weapons, those tools used to perpetrate fear and intimidation among communities. Mr. President, the security forces have demonstrated to us through the conduct of the zones of special operations and through the operations under the state of emergency thus far, that they understand the context and extent of the additional powers which have been granted them. They have executed their duties in a commendable way and are being meticulous and accountable in how they operate. We must, Mr. President, thank and recognize the security forces for the excellent job they are doing in exercising their enhanced powers responsibly. Furthermore, Mr. President, we have established the prescribed Emergency Powers Tribunal, which gives citizens who feel they may have been aggrieved during the course of the state of emergency direct recourse to legal consideration or to claim redress outside of the heavily burdened court system. The media, Mr. President, human rights advocates, and the public defender have been facilitated in observing the processes and facilities being used for detention. And the Cornwall Bar Association has facilitated the provision of legal support for detainees in need of same. Commendably, to the best of my knowledge, Mr. President, we have not received any formal complaint of human rights abuses to date. And this is a clear credit to the security forces and the systems of accountability put in place to secure the rights of citizens. The system is working, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is in this way that we build confidence between the public and the security forces. We need to support our security forces as we seek to ensure a better future for all our citizens. And while we acknowledge that there has been and may well be some disruption in the day-to-day activities of those within the parish, we must take back control of our country. We must dismantle the networks of organized crime, and we must undermine and disrupt the criminal enterprises that have been allowed to flourish in the parish of St. James. Hear, hear. Mr. President, it was not anticipated that all that is required could or would be accomplished in 14 days. It is reasonable to expect that even with extraordinary powers, it will take some time to sustainably address the situation in St. James. Gun crimes and violent incidents have certainly been curtailed. So far as I'm aware, there was one murder within the first week of the declaration of the state of emergency. More than 50 persons have been arrested and charged, and more, of course, have been detained and released, demonstrating that the system is working. But time is necessary not only to reduce the risk of flare-ups at the end of the state of emergency, but to build intelligence and address not only the perpetrators, but also the facilitators of crime. Mr. President, the Prime Minister has been clear. The overall response of the government to criminal ecosystems, to the criminal ecosystems, has to be more sophisticated than directing action solely to the criminal gangs and street-level criminals. It must extend beyond the Jamaica Constabulary Force and the Jamaica Defense Force to our other enforcement arms in government, whose efforts address unexplained wealth, public order in towns, illegal construction, illicit businesses, and any other matter which affects the rule of law. Mr. President, it is critical that the destructive, heartless criminals and those driven by sheer greed understand that Jamaica is united against them. It is critical, Mr. President, that Jamaicans at all levels of our society and in all dimensions understand that there is no divide on the need to take extraordinary action against crime. No social divide, as violence can affect the smallest district in the tiniest town or the tallest ivory tower. No economic divide, because, Mr. President, it affects all aspects of business and growth. Mr. President, in this regard, on the matter of economic divide, I want to thank those members of the business sector who have borne any disruption in their operations with a clear understanding that the big picture, the Jamaica picture, demands that on the other side of the disruption, on the other side of any potential blip in their margins, that on the other side, Mr. President, is a better Jamaica for us all. I want to also thank, Mr. President, those citizens who have used the confidential line established by the JDF, specifically in respect of the state of emergency, to allow for information to be shared. And we encourage them to continue to do so. Because, Mr. President, it is only when criminals understand that we, Jamaica, that we as a people have made up our minds against crime and criminality. It is only, Mr. President, when each and every law-abiding citizen has made the decision to make up their mind against crime in this country, when they not only see the security forces acting, but the people acting, the citizens acting. Mr. President, I want to just use this opportunity to remind persons who may be listening through you that the Jamaica Defense Force has established a 24-hour manned hotline to allow for persons to confidentially convey information. The number is 837-8888, manned by the JDF for 24 hours. We encourage them to use that line to share information. And we also want to remind them, Mr. President, that 311, the confidential Crime Stop line, which is not even answered in Jamaica, that it continues to be active, it has never been breached, and if they have information about guns or wanted men, or even suspicious people in their communities since the declaration of the state of emergency, that they can and should call. And if they call the 311, they can also get a reward, Mr. President. I think it's always important for us to remind each and every one that they have a role that they can play in their own corner, safely and securely, to share information. Mr. President, these matters take time, and it will take time to take back St. James. It will take time to take back Jamaica, but together as a people, we can do it. I spoke earlier, Mr. President, about no social divide and no economic divide. But we must also remember the important signal that it sends if there is no political divide. Mr. President, this position, the fact that there is no political divide on this matter, was clearly demonstrated in the lower house on Tuesday, when 51 members of the House, all members present, voted for the extension of the state of public emergency. Mr. President, I want to personally express the comment made by Senator Morris earlier, indicating that despite his personal celebratory event this morning, he has so elevated this issue that he has rendered himself on call should his vote be noted for the record. And we, of course, anticipate that the same support is being brought, and we appreciate it, Mr. President. Each and every Jamaican appreciates it. But, Mr. President, it is in this context that this morning I will move the Emergency Powers Continuation Resolution 2018 to have the state of public emergency and the emergency powers regulations remain in force until May 2nd, 2018. I look forward to the support of this Honourable Senate. I thank you.
Mr. President, I rise to give my fulsome support to the resolution that is tabled before us. And as I stated and repeated by the Honourable Leader of Government Business, that I am on call. If you can't get me, I am leaving the number of my driver because he will be with me to make sure that I am contacted and be brought back here. And we are just down the road. Not today, not today. It's just up the road on North Street that I will be at. So it's very close by. But, Mr. President, honorable members, there's a scourge of violence across our country. and we have to make a concerted effort to stamp it out. And I am very annoyed, I'm very angry at the fact that for 2017, 1,000, based on the data that was presented, 1,617 Jamaicans were murdered. And you know, Mr. President, I have asked myself, what is happening in our society? What could have contributed to this? In the heights of political divide in our country, the records have it that 800 individuals were murdered. We are not in a civil war, and the political parties are not in that sort of warfare that they were involved in previously. But yet still, 1,617 Jamaicans were murdered. And for me, it is very disturbing, and it is a cause for all of us that are involved in leadership and governance in our country to take stock of what is taking place. And I went back into history and tried to make some connections between the revolts, the rebellions that have taken place since slavery was abolished in 1838. Mr. President, there is a trend and there is a pattern. Because having received freedom after the abolition of slavery, our people, our forefathers, were subject to significant social problems. It led to the Morant Bay Rebellion. In 1938, we again witnessed and experienced riots in our country because the social conditions. In the late 1960s, we experienced it again. And the trend continues. And it is my humble opinion, Mr. President, that we are having this deep problem of violence in our country because some of the conditions that ought to be addressed from way back when, not just yesterday, but from way back when, have not been addressed. I believe, Mr. President, that we have to really sit down and do some deep analysis, because what we are doing here today, you know, based on the state of emergency, is to give powers to the security forces to act and deal with a situation in the short term. And I agree, and that is why I'm fully supporting the extension. I agree that the measures have to be addressed in the short term, medium term, and in the long term. And we're giving the security forces the powers. But there are some substantial issues that we have to address in terms of radically transforming and improving the social landscape, improving the social conditions so that our people across the country who are living in squalor can see some tangible improvement. Because if we don't address these issues, we are going to be having a continued cycle of crime and violence in our country. And we all have to take stock, because somewhere out there in the society, there's a quiet rebellion that is taking place. And as leaders, we must make sure that we get to the root of the problem, not just creating a security response, but we must also find out what are the real underlying cause for this level of criminality that is taking place across our country. My hunch is that because of the significant deterioration in terms of social infrastructure and the fact that some of the issues that should have been addressed after slavery was abolished have not been fundamentally addressed, we are having these problems today. And I am urging members that we do a detailed analysis of it and come up with an action plan to make sure that we have a sustained response in the medium and in the long term to cauterize this monster that is affecting all of us. I always say, Mr. President, that crime and violence or gunshot knows no color. It doesn't know green, it doesn't know orange or any other color. So we have to make sure that we adopt a united stance when it comes on to criminality. And I want to indicate my fulsome support for this resolution, and I take my leave, but as one former leader said, I shall return. May it please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, for too long the phrase state of emergency meant for so many abuse, fear not only for criminals but for all. Today we can consider, Mr. President, a change of tide, where the phrase state of emergency now evokes confidence because of the demonstration of the respect and dignity for our people. We hope and we commend the forces and hope that we can continue to execute in this way throughout the anticipated extension. Mr. President, there are those among us, those in our country who traffic in fear, cultivating it, perpetuating it, benefiting from it, branding it Jamaica, and trading it even for ill-gotten money, guns, and drugs. Mr. President, I believe that these criminals do not pay enough for this tax on all other Jamaicans, and the price of this fear is our peace of mind, our safety, our freedom, our unassailable right as a democratic people. As my colleague Senator said, we have had over 1,600 murders reported last year, 335 in St. James alone. And what has been defined as a bloody start to this year has echoed, Mr. President, the need for this concerted, purposive approach to curtailing the scourge of violence in our second city. and across the country. Serious times call for serious action. Forgive me, Senator Charles. Serious times, Mr. President, call for serious action. And it is the responsibility of this government, insofar as we will make every effort to put a halt to the chaos and the lawlessness and to ensure that each and every person in our country can enjoy the freedom and protection as enshrined in our Constitution. We must remind ourselves, Mr. President, that these traffickers of fear are among the few, but still the implications of their criminality disseminates and deteriorates the quality of life and peace of mind of all Jamaicans, both here and abroad. Our industries, Mr. President, not the least of which are tourism, agriculture, and other service-related industries, are disrupted, trade and investment stifled, and law-abiding citizens displaced. Something had to be done. Mr. President, the state of emergency means that the security forces are empowered with extraordinary powers to disrupt the criminal networks through searches, curfews, detention. But that is being done while enforcing the rule of law, protecting our Constitution, and demonstrating respect for law-abiding citizens. We have to and continue to call for the support and understanding in these trying times. Mr. President, our Prime Minister has been on the ground in Montego Bay and across St. James. Our Minister of National Security. We are all present because the safety of our citizens is this administration's top priority. Mr. President, so far, the security forces have unearthed and arrested several wanted men and confiscated over 12 firearms, including 5 rifles and over 200 rounds of ammunition. This disruption in what leader of government business called the criminal ecosystem is working. And we are taking back control of our streets and corridors in St. James. Jamaica will not belong to criminals, Mr. President. No more comfortable ride. Mr. President, we must also note that the lessons of previous declarations has been learned, and that there has been as little as possible negative impact on the normal affairs of the law-abiding citizens and tourists. These are the very rights for which we are very and ever vigilant to protect. That is a story worth telling. The fact that now there is so much more to be enjoyed in St. James because the criminals cannot and will not be allowed to go about their day business as usual. The work continues and the achievements thus far are only the beginning. Mr. President, again, let me commend the security forces, and I know I do so jointly, who continue to work under perilous conditions as they face danger every day to serve and protect us, the citizens of Jamaica. When we sleep, they have to be awake. And while we are awake, they have to be aware. It is through their dedication, perseverance, along with the combined efforts of our stakeholders in the security sector, that we saw reductions in 5 of the 7 major categories of crime. But we continue, Mr. President, to note and acknowledge that we are a far way off, and there is much work to be done. This current state of emergency has been timely, effective, and well managed, and the context for the extension is mitigation against the impact that it may have on the wider society, industry, and transitioning to a more stable operational security framework. We are not only targeting the perpetrators of crime, Mr. President, but also the facilitators of criminal activity. It was never anticipated that all the work to be done would be accomplished in the 14 days, and so it is reasonable to expect that even with extraordinary powers, it will take some time to get the situation in St. James under control, as we all agree that the problem didn't occur in 2 weeks and will not be solved in 2 weeks. That is the importance of the extension. That's the importance of the emergency powers continuation resolution before this Honourable House today, of which I support. Our first step in disrupting criminality, second in managing the situation and limiting the impact on the wider Jamaican framework, and the third must be restorative justice across our country. Mr. President, reports on the security operations to date are that they are going well. The state of emergency has resulted in the detention of over 527 persons. And as I said before, the seizure of 12 firearms, 5 of which include rifles, approximately 225 rounds of ammunition. Among the persons detained are 12 wanted men connected to serious crimes, including murder and shooting. The security forces have also advised, Mr. President, that several more of those persons detained are strongly believed to be connected to gangs in St. James and across the country. There are currently, based on advice, 16 persons remaining in custody, some of the persons subject to further investigation. And the security forces, Mr. President, continue to ask for the support and information from the public. Citizens are assisting, have been giving information, and are helping hand in hand with the security forces. A number of operations are also being carried out island-wide, Mr. President, as criminals will seek refuge in other parishes. These operations are aimed at apprehending wanted men who may have eluded the main area of operation in St. James. So let me note, Mr. President, divisions within Area 5 conducted a 24-hour blitz which saw increased visibility and intensified operational activities to include raids, searches, visits to persons on curfew orders, etc. 18 persons were detained in St. Catherine North and 1 in St. Catherine South. Operations had been launched in St. Anne, St. Mary, and Westmoreland, to name a few. Portmore St. Catherine has been identified, Mr. President, as a likely area where displaced criminals are likely to be housed. As such, a joint team from CTOC Central, the Fugitive Apprehension Team, and Mobile Reserve conducted targeted raids on several premises. The Mobile Reserve and the St. Andrew Central Police apprehended 2 persons of interest in August Town on the 23rd of January relative to a shooting in that community. Continued operations by CTOC and FAT are resulting also, Mr. President, in the apprehension of even wanted men, men who are wanted in the United States. Mr. President, I note those operations to reiterate that the state of emergency is one tool in the suite of tools that are being presented by the administration as the national security apparatus for us to have sustainable reductions in crime and violence. And we are not fooled or naive to believe that this state of emergency of itself will be the panacea or an all-in-all solution. And so we continue, Mr. President, to indicate to the citizens of this country that along with the state of emergency will be a complement of operations, a complement of investment made for us to ensure that the security of our people is our top priority. Mr. President, there is respect for the rule of law, respect for Jamaicans, respect for the humanity in all persons, including those detained. It is hard work to be done. We cannot allow, Mr. President, or afford to allow what I've defined as the fair traffickers to win. We will not allow the few to define who we are as Jamaicans. And I make that statement clearly, noting that so many persons around the world, hearing the phraseology state of emergency, are so apprehensive. But we will continue to disrupt the criminal network and demonstrate professionalism so those at home and abroad can be confident in coming to Jamaica. Mr. President, as I said, it is not a complete fix to our problems, but when it is operated effectively and with respect for human rights and dignity, it goes a far way to move us in the right direction. Sustainable crime reduction will require fundamental changes along with continued significant investment in our social and educational systems. We know that this is not a magic wand. And for those persons who are justifiably cynical, for those persons who are justifiably scared, this government, Mr. President, is committed to providing the inputs over the short, medium, and long term. We cannot say it often enough. Crime is everybody's problem. It is not the problem of the Minister of National Security or the Prime Minister or the Leader of Opposition. It is a problem for all of us. So, Mr. President, I end by continuing the appeal and echoing the sentiments of our Leader of Government Business as well as Senator Morris in appealing to all Jamaicans to continue to cooperate and work with the security forces to take back our country from these criminals and make Jamaica a peaceful, safe, and secure nation. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Charles.
Mr. President.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, as one who have continuously sought to remind this Senate and through the Senate, the nation, about the seriousness of the crime threat on the country, and as one who have been ignored most of the times when I've raised it, I am rising today in support of the extension of the state of emergency because it brings temporary relief from the 6 murders per week in St. James. However, my support for the extension must not be seen as a support for this clueless government whose inaction has led to the sordid state of our beautiful country. They talk and PR where action should have been taken to save the lives of our people. I don't come here today to live in a state of denial, as some might be tempted to do. I come to talk truth to power. Because for too long, we have talked and not really taken serious action. Mr. President, I've lived with some statements which citizens have called idiotic statements. I won't call it so. But when somebody says, in January last year, to the criminals of the country, you must put your lawyer number and speed dial, because this minister not afraid of you, because my uncle is a Obia man. And then the criminal, instead of putting the lawyer's number and speed dial, increase by 20% the number of murders over the year before. I believe the citizens are justified in calling that one idiotic statement. Another idiotic statement, according to the citizens with whom I speak, says, in or around September, when the Zozo law was being passed, they said the criminals must run away, because all bad men must run away, because those are going to take care of them. And as if the criminals were playing poker, they said, raise it, raise that. And they put on 20% increase in the murders. Idiotic statement number 2. Why are you telling the bad man to run away? 3, what people are saying is an idiotic statement. It's a statement which says, we are going to amend the anti-gang legislation to put on control orders on the gang members so the police can monitor them. What nonsense. If you know who the gang members are, don't put on control order on them. Lock them up under the anti-gang legislation. Put them away. Up to 25 years, I believe, the punishment is. So I'm not living in a state of denial. I'm exposing idiotic statement according to the citizens. 4th idiotic statement according to the citizens. Listen to this, Mr. President. It says, we're going after the kingfish and the facilitators of crime, not just the street fighters. Isn't that a warning to the big people that you're coming for them and they must prepare and hide and run? Don't give them a warning. Go and get them and lock them up, put them in handcuffs and take the picture, convict them and send them to prison. Idiotic statement number 4. So I make the point, Mr. President, that there's a lot of talk and talk. The reality is, this government must take full responsibility for the failing to stem this monster of crime eating away at the fabric of our society. Mr. President, today is the 1st of February, 2018. 1 year ago, on the 3rd of February, I stood right here in my State of the Nation address. It was then entitled, A Nation in Fear, Murder Stalk the Land. That's 1 year ago. It was a call for action, not a call for talk and inaction. Mr. President, in that speech I said the following. Because when I was preparing for this, I said, you don't need to rewrite a speech. The speech was given last year. Remind them of it. This is what I said last year. Based on the number of murders for the first month of this year, including the horrible murder of the 97-year-old journalist Peter Abrams, we appear to be on track to exceed the terrible number of 1,350 murders last year. Even worse is the fact that in January of this year, the clear-up rate for murders is the lowest in the last 3 years. That's what I said on the 3rd of February, 2017. Then I said we were on target to exceed the 1,350 murders. What is the reality? We had 1,616. We surpassed it. Wasn't you forewarned? Didn't you see the numbers? Oh, where's my friend, Senator Webby? because he understands numbers. The numbers told us where we were going. Just as Mr. President, the numbers are telling us this year. My source telling me at a minimum 161 murders for January 2018. Divide that by 31, the days in the month. You're at 5.1, despite the state of emergency. Multiply that 5.1 per day for January 2018 by 365 days. We're looking at 1,895 likely murders. That should be frightening to us. That's not the state Senator Pernell Charles you just described about the good things being done. The people of this country are living in fear. People tell you, you talk about robberies down. The truth is people are not reporting robberies anymore. People are being held up left, right, and center throughout the country. So let's face some reality. Let's talk truth to ourselves and to power. The people of this country are living in fear. And when you have a state of emergency in a parish and gunmen shoot up a funeral in the bounds of that state of emergency, that's contempt for the state of emergency. That's contempt for the state. And when they shoot up Irwin and Melbourne in the state of emergency parish, that's contempt they are showing. So, let us be clear. Let us be clear. Let us be clear. We need to move in a way in this country that seriously tackle crime. This is why, Mr. President, the confusion this morning of two commissioners turning up at office. Commissioner Quayle turning up and saying, I don't get no letter. And Commissioner Blake acting. That's the type of confusion we're getting from this government that doesn't want to take responsibility. It's the type of confusion that we see in the cars for the Ministry of National Security. It's a government that is failing to protect the citizens of our country. So when you tell me about a state of emergency, it brings a temporary lull. Brings a temporary lull. It's welcome. But equally, let us not forget, this is our last throw of the dice. What else beyond a state of emergency we have? And already, the state of emergency is impacting negatively our tourism and our economy. Don't take that from me. Take it from the then acting director of tourism when he said, we have had some cancellations from groups and incentive bookings, but not in any big waves. And our overseas tour operators are helping us to get the word out that Montego Bay is a safe destination for travel. And then he talks about cancellation taking place later for 2018. Like pregnancy, Mr. President. It's coming. So, we did not need to come to this point where we are having to take the last resort of a state of emergency if we are taking the proper action along the way. That's the reality. That's the reality that we are running away from. And that's the reality we must face. So this idea that we have shown the state of emergency and somehow it is going to bring calm. Mr. President, when I look at the years, Montego Bay, 2013, 166 murders. 2014, the lowest murder rate in the country. Peter Bunting was the Minister of National Security. 157 murders in St. James that year. But in 2015, it went up. Bunting was the minister too. to 211. Then 2016, 265. 2017, 335. Those numbers, any businessman, any commissioner, any minister, any chairman of the National Security Council, as the Prime Minister is, ought to be looking at those numbers and saying, we need to take corrective measures. Mr. President, I understand their unease. I understand their unease. But the reality is, last year in the State of the Nation address, I mentioned that the Prime Minister was in 2016, May, at 4:30 on that particular day, tweeting that we had a 5% reduction in murder. And I made the point then that the Prime Minister were going in the wrong direction. I recall after my speech last year, Senator Hill said, oh, it's just 1 year, and we're going to put the proper things in place. Well, 1 more year gone, Senator Hill, because the newspaper recorded your statement. 1 more year gone, and 1,616 of our brothers and sisters, our family members, have been killed. Where is the crime plan? I asked it last year, I asked it again, because the Prime Minister on numerous occasions promised us a comprehensive crime plan. Where is that crime plan? Where is that crime plan? So, Zozo was one of their response. Zozo is a failure. How can you have Zozo and 2 men get killed in Denham Town in a drive-by shooting when all the checkpoints were supposed to be manned? Isn't that a sign that Zozo is a failure? And so I am hoping, Mr. President, that in voting for this extension of the state of emergency, they will act in a way, they will conduct themselves in a way which will make the state of emergency don't go in the path of Zozo's failure. And already, while they are patting their backs, themselves on the backs, let's examine some numbers. Because I am a man driven by numbers. Not fancy talk, not sweet mouth, not lyrics. I look at the hard, cold data. Mr. President, since the state of emergency, we are told they have detained 499 persons. 499. 12 charged. 6 in detention. Let's take the 12 that is charged. What percentage of those people that took up? Senator Webber, where are you? I want you to do the math for me. Less than 3%. Less than 3% of every 100, less than 3 out of every 100 that took up. Less than 3 out of every 100 person that took up was wanted. So what we're doing here, we're not really getting the wanted people. And let me tell you why, Mr. President. If you think it's 12 persons responsible for the mayhem in St. James, let us be clear. In 2016, there were 265 murders in St. James. 2017, there's 335 murders. In the 2 years, that's 600 murders. 88% by the gun. They say they get 10 guns, and they cheer for that. I cheer with you. But let us recognize that those 600 murders, at least 500 and nearly 500 would have been committed by the gun. Am I to believe it's only 10 guns that did that? So the question for me, what is the key performance indicator of success. What is the key performance indicator of success? If I listen to the Prime Minister, it's the absence of debt. Well, that can't be. It cannot be the absence of debt, because the citizens of the country applaud those taken out in St. Elizabeth and the guns recovered. And I applaud the police force and the security force for doing that. But we must recognize that the guns are out there and the guns need to be recovered. Mr. President, it's not the first time that Montego Bay has gone into a lull. Let's see if I find that document here. Listen to this. This is 2015. In fact, the year did not start well, whether in St. James or the rest of the country. There was a rush of murders early on. Indeed, by June, so concerned had the authorities become about the situation in St. James, where there were already 103 murders. We're talking 2005. The authorities dispatched additional police officers as well as soldiers to the region to keep the peace. And listen to this. Their presence contributed to a slowdown, if not a lull, in the killings. That's 2015. 600 murders in St. James since then. So, and part of the reason for that is that the resources and other constraints forced the police to scale back their deployment in St. James. Do you believe we weren't going to keep this state of emergency going indefinitely? Do we have the resources for it? And so that is why we need to get the guns. We need to get the gangs. Mr. President, in September of this year, last year, I moved a motion in the Senate complaining about murders being 25% higher than the same period in 2016. I said then, and whereas this high number of murders is adversely impacting thousands of families in our country and creating a sense of fear and hopelessness across the population of the country, and then I propose that we establish a joint select committee. This didn't even earn us a discussion in the Senate. And you're talking about passing law to lack of people like me? That's what you just said earlier? That's the mindset you have, young man? You're in the wrong place. Mr. President, not only, no, you shouldn't respond because you should not have said what you said. Mr. President, last year, February, I made some proposals in the Senate. What I described as, let me suggest, then I said, Mr. President, let me suggest some low-hanging fruits that can be picked in a successful fight against crime. This opposition have put forward proposals and ideas which the government has neglected and which has led to an increase in the murder rate. And I'm going to repeat what I said then. Let me repeat what I said then. Re-motivate the police. The cabinet should urgently agree to undertake the payment of legal expenses of members of the security forces arising from confrontation with criminal elements. This should include the cost for lawyers appearing before INDECOM and in the court if necessary. 1 year ago, I proposed that on behalf of this opposition. You know what happened, Mr. President? I saw it this week, because the leader of government business said then, we're doing it. But this week I saw that the minister said he's making submission to cabinet about something that we proposed a year ago. Let us be clear, Mr. President. I don't know what took him so long. I don't know if he was waiting on an uncle or something to solve the problem. Right? I don't know if he was waiting on an uncle or something to solve the problem. But clearly, as Sparrow said, Obia can't work. As Sparrow said, Obia can't work. Second proposal we made was about taking back our communities from the domination of the criminals by building partnership between the state, private sector, churches, civil society, and communities. I haven't seen that. Third thing I said, and this is key if you really want to understand crime fighting, rigorously implement the anti-gang law and set targets for the dismantling of the gangs. I said then, yes, you heard it already and did nothing, so I'm telling you again. We said then, establish a register of all gangs and their members. If we did that from February last year, wouldn't we be picking up 500? Wouldn't we be picking up 500? Wouldn't we be picking up Mr. President? Mr. President, it seems as if I'm not going to be allowed to continue my speech in silence.
Allow the member to continue, please.
Thank you. Mr. President, had they established a register, how much time I have lived? That's good fun. I know you wasn't, but I just want to know myself so I can decide how fast I go. Because I know you don't plan to give me an extension. Mr. President? No, I'm calm. But I understand. 10 minutes? Good. Mr. President, had they developed that register, if each police unit division had identified the violence producers, when the state of emergency called, wouldn't we be picking up 500 people? Wouldn't we be picking up 500 people, of which only 3% were wanted? Would be going for the 97% would be those who we want. The 97% is what we'll be going for. Not 97% picked up and let go. Right? So it is clear to me. You know, Mr. Chairman.
And you allow the speaker to finish,
clear,
please.
Chairman, that somewhere the rear of the chicken must have been served for breakfast. I didn't have breakfast this morning. Mr. President, they just get it. Let's just slowly just get it. Mr. President, we also proposed that they should establish an anti-gang court to move swiftly with those who they caught. Thankfully, to the previous administration, we were bold enough. Do you want my vote? Allow me to speak. Yeah. But if you want my vote, allow me to speak. Because if I'm going to be run out of the Senate, I won't be able to vote. So let us be clear. Mr. President,
Senator Brown is to be given the courtesy to allow him to finish his presentation.
Mr. President, what is clear to me is that in 2014, when we set up the system of reduced people pleading guilty when they see the case against them, we have seen people who have been charged less than a year being brought and convicted. It shows me that we can prepare a case within a year. Had we not been bold to do that legislation in 2014, we'd be having cases running for 6 years. And by 6 years, witness gone, disappear. So the opposition laid a number, while we were in government, a number of pieces of legislation, anti-gang, latter scamming, a number of justice reform, to allow us to fight the criminals. What we even negotiated to get a new prison to lock them up. But people played politics as they are playing politics now. And we have come to this sad state in our country for which they don't want to take responsibility. Listen to what they're saying, sotto voce. It's the Services Commission. Services Commission.
I don't, Senator Brown, don't respond to the sotto voce because that is the nature of a sotto voce remark.
No, but the country must know what they're saying. They don't want to take responsibility. And I'm saying the state of crime we face is because of their lack of planning, the lack of a comprehensive crime plan. That's why so many people have been murdered in this country. And they want to pass.
A point of order, Mr. President.
They put in a comprehensive crime plan.
1 minute, Senator Brown. Point of order.
A point of order. Mr. President, I have heard, what is his name again? Senator Brown, consistently speak about the lack of a crime plan. The lack of a crime plan. The government has on so many occasions indicated that we do not seek to speak of a crime plan, but a national security strategy, which has been promulgated and discussed over and over.
Thank you, Senator
several
Charles.
times. So it is important for Jamaica
Charles.
not to be misled.
Thank you, Senator Charles. Continue, please.
Thank you, sir. The tactics has failed, Senator Charles. Mr. President, I never said yet, that the Prime Minister in opposition told this country that if you want to live safe in your yard, if you want to be able to fall asleep and leave your door open and wake up in the morning and still be alive, you cannot make the mistake of voting for the PNP. Well, I voted for you. 13,500 people murdered in 2016. 1,616 in 2017. And we are on target for 1,800, almost 1,900 for this year at the rate at which we are going. A failed thing. And I said this against, Mr. President, the Prime Minister saying that, this is what he said in June 2016. We're giving the law enforcement agency the resources they need and supporting other ways to ensure they can deal effectively with crime generally and murders in particularly. Our resolve is to see a consistent reduction in crime, and we're working towards that aim. Have they succeeded? No. The numbers said you have failed. Prime Minister went on in September and said, there is no denying, he was speaking in Montego Bay, there is no denying that Mr. President, can I have some silence from young Colonel Charles? He doesn't like the truth. Just calm down. Mr. President, in September 2016, the Prime Minister said the following in Montego Bay. There is no denying that the past week has been a trying one. It has created a great deal of fear in citizens and concern right across the country, and indeed globally, as the local images find their way into news feed internationally. When on the 16th of January this year, that shooting took place at the Montego Bay Airport roundabout, it found its way in the international feed. Not surprising that 2 days after, a state of emergency is declared in St. James. What a coincidence. The absence of a plan. Prime Minister went on in the beginning of December 2016, speaking at the installation of the new Chief of Staff, Defense Staff, Rocky Mead, said that the National Security Council was finalizing a comprehensive action plan. That's December 2016. 1,616 Jamaicans have died, murdered, waiting for that comprehensive action plan. And so, Mr. President, I ask again, as I did on the 3rd of February last year, where is the comprehensive crime plan? A comprehensive crime plan is not taking tint off of taxi windows and thinking somehow that will reduce the murder. It never did. A comprehensive crime plan is not passing something called Zozo and think that that will reduce murder. It never did. A comprehensive crime plan is not telling me that youngsters need to be taken off the street so they can get an ID. That's not a comprehensive crime plan, and it hasn't reduced murder. What is clear, the minister has failed, the Prime Minister has failed to keep his promise to give every minister a job description. That's the reality. What is the job description of the Minister of National Security? Where year after year the murders increase. This government, Mr. President, must take full responsibility for the crime situation and their failure to act and to act firmly. Had they listened to the opposition, had they taken no advice, had they acted in good faith, we would not be where we are today. Now I make it clear, when we say the police services must focus on conviction rates of guilty criminals, not only 499 people and letting go 97% of them because they had nothing to do. Focus on the people who committed the crime. That hasn't been done. Finally, Mr. President, you think I'm afraid of wearing me? Sorry.
Speaker's time has expired. You're wrapping up?
That's what I'm doing. So if a minute would be sufficient.
Mr. President, the
Mr.
Speaker's
President,
time.
I don't need any more time.
Mr. President.
Senator Brown, thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Samuda.
Mr. President, I woke up to a headline this week which spoke about unity and a display of unity in the other place for the crime fight. It was certainly, I would say, a different display than what we have just witnessed. A most unfortunate contribution from my colleague senator previously. And I think the utterance about suggesting that you don't get my vote yet is most despicable. It holds the people of St. James hostage so you can mislead and put forward ridiculous utterances. But, you know, I'm going to start. Sorry. I am not shocked. But I'm going to start with some notes from the Hansard, Mr. President, from a debate held on Tuesday, June 29th, 1976. And if I can be allowed, President, to quote former Prime Minister Michael Manley. More than ever, I call on every man and woman to stand with their nation and help the security forces in all possible ways. Above all, people must come forward with information. Many of you have heard or seen things, the nature of which you do not understand at the time because you could not have understood what was really going on. Mr. Speaker, our watchword now must be vigilance, discipline. Let all Jamaicans unite to keep our country peaceful, democratic, hardworking, and with God's help, devoted always to the progress of the people. Now, I certainly believe those words are appropriate today. I won't speak on their appropriateness from then. But I look even further back to our first state of emergency as an independent nation. I'd like to quote Mr. Roy McNeil, former Minister of Home Affairs. He said, "There are some people who say that the government ought to have acted sooner. I am not here to fight or argue with such people on that issue, but we should realize that the declaration of a state of emergency is a decision that no government can take lightly. When we realize that we are a country who have earned a reputation throughout the years for political tolerance and stability, the reputation of being the most outstanding country in the world in relationships among people of differing religions, of different races, of different cultures, of different colors of the skin, we must also realize that the declaration of a state of emergency would be expected to shake the economy of our country, for it is true to say that we enjoy large revenues from tourism, and we have so far secured a lot of capital investment overseas. People will become very sensitive to an area of unrest, so it is not a matter that can be taken lightly. Am I satisfied at the time of the declaration of the state of emergency that the government acted at the right time? Apart from the build-up in violence in the western Kingston area, as he was speaking of at the time, let us ask ourselves the question, why did the government seek emergency powers? First of all, let us deal with the role of the police. I do not seek to hide the fact it has been a matter of greatest difficulty for the recruiting section of the police force to secure recruits and even maintain the level of the force at its present standard and to take care of the resignations and of the deaths and other things that are called wastage, let alone add to the police force. We have a police force. It is obliged to take on every day more and more arduous duties. And the police force was strained through no fault of theirs, through circumstances, and those who should know the position. I believe that every member of the House knows that some of the men are pulled from rural areas in order to provide the requirements of corporate Jamaica, provide for the requirements of corporate Jamaica. Then again, we in Jamaica operate a constitution that may aptly be described as ultra-democratic. It restricts the rights of everyone to interfere with the freedoms of everyone. The police in their actions have got to be the most circumspect, and in a situation that was in existence in the western section of Kingston, the police were not able to enter premises without formal warrant. The police were not in search without formal warrant. Police were not able to apprehend people in many departments of the police work that became urgently necessary to be discharged in a situation such as this. The police force was hampered by the laws governing their movements. Mr. President, that was 1966. Unfortunately, in this country, we have been here before. This is the 5th state of emergency declared. One was shortly after Hurricane Ivan, as there were concerns. The other 4 have been at times where issues of public safety had certainly worn on the governments of the day, and they took the particular action. But, Mr. President, it was particularly concerning for me to read the Hansards of sittings of Parliament and of the Senate where regulations similar to these were debated, especially when you read sections of it and you feel that 52 years later, some of it could apply to now. Yeah. So I think it's important, and it has been said by speakers before, that we congratulate the security forces on the professionalism being shown and the work they are doing to protect human rights. But I think it's important that we on both sides acknowledge that 52 years later, after the section that I just read from former Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Roy McNeil, that there are many factors that lead to crime that we have not yet addressed. And, you know, President, we have a lot of work to do. It requires the unity that was on display in the other place, I believe, on Tuesday afternoon. And it requires the unity that was on display before he left from Senator Floyd Morris. So I certainly will have a chance later to vote and give my support. And I hope that the remaining members on the other side will do the same. Because the truth is, I know the numbers. We all know the numbers. We can quote the numbers as they are related to the loss of life for violent crime as far back as we would like to. We can debate the varying reasons. But I think both sides will agree that every member of the Jamaican society who has lost their life to violent means was one member too many. We don't need to politicize this, because I think I play politics pretty well if I need to. But today is not the day for that. The fact is, the government has told the nation on many occasions of the suite of plans and of activations to come to curtail the crime rate. We have implemented a few thus far. We have increased the resources to the crime fight significantly. And the truth is, this is just another step that we must take along that long path. We didn't get here overnight. We didn't. We've had, in the last decade or so, 3 years where over 1,600 persons were murdered. We've had it under the administrations from both sides of the House and of the Senate. Yes, in 2005, 2009, and again last year. So we don't need to politicize it. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think we need to move on and signal our support for the extension of these regulations, of the state of emergency, rather. We will have fair time, colleagues, at an appropriate juncture, perhaps in the State of the Nation debate, to rebut and debunk a lot of the nonsense that was presented here earlier. So I ask my colleagues to join with me and join with us on this side to support the extension of the state of emergency.
Thank you, Senator Somoda. Senator Knight.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President. President, I don't know whether at the end of my contribution it is going to be said that I have politicized the issue or not. But I'm speaking from the heart, and I'm speaking as a concerned Jamaican. And maybe I'm speaking from another point, which is that for 12 years, 8 months, 16 days, and 10 minutes, I had to deal with this problem. So I understand it. And I empathize with all those who have to be dealing with it now as part of a portfolio responsibility. I want to start at section 2, the interpretation section of the Emergency Powers Act. The definition of competent authority is competent authority in relation to all the provisions of these regulations that confer any powers upon a competent authority means the Governor General, the Minister responsible for national security, the Chief of Defense Staff, the Commissioner of Police, each Deputy Commissioner of Police, or the Senior Officer of Police in each parish. So then, if this is to work, one of the first things we need to know who is the Commissioner of Police. Can't have two at any one time. That ushers in chaos, because it means that if there's a call for the Commissioner of Police to act in a particular way as part of the competent authority, there must be one man in charge, or one woman in charge, one person in charge as commissioner. And where there is confusion in such an area, the tendency is that the members of the society believe that they, and I don't want to define they don't know what they are doing. They don't know. So if the issue has not yet been resolved, they ought to resolve it swiftly. I'm supporting the extension, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe that we need some extraordinary powers given to those in the security forces to deal with an extraordinary problem. And I believe also that one of the failings we have had in dealing with this troubled issue of crime control is that many times we can't get both sides to agree on any measure. We can't get both sides to agree on any legislation. And it sends a message of division. I know that in my time, I complained bitterly about it, that persons in the opposition would rise and the first thing they say is, it can't work. And I used to feel, of course it can't work. Because if only a section of the society is going to support it, it won't work. If I got up here this morning and said, I am not supporting this, there would be some persons who would say, if Senator not supporting it, I'm not supporting it. And if the leader of the opposition in the House below should rise and say he's not supporting it, then a significant portion of the society would say they're not supporting it either. And so it would be if any other member on this side should say that, and then the member on that side, because they would say, if they can't even agree amongst themselves that this is the way to go, how can I support it? So the fact that downstairs there was bipartisan support, and there is an indication upstairs that there's going to be bipartisan support is a good message that has been sent. And so I say this, not in any pejorative way. Don't squander it. Don't squander it. You might have to wait a long time for it to happen again. Maybe. Maybe in May, we will be called on to do this again. So let us see how we can work together to get some success out of this. But I want to say this, that I have listened to each participant in this debate. And that you are supportive does not mean that you can't proffer some ideas. And each participant that I have heard has proffered ideas. So don't knock anyone because the fullness of what was said was not in praise only of that which the government is embarking on. Because everyone, especially those who have access to the airwaves, is important. And if in this process we alienate anyone, then we are weakening the platform on which we are standing. So I don't know who is to speak after, but whoever it is, don't alienate anyone. The Emergency Powers Act. The Emergency Powers Act, conferring all these extra powers on the security forces, is not going to be the sole solution. It has to be a part of a package. But what we have to do now is to show the strength of the state. I've always felt that the state has at some time to show its strength and control. I have been taken to task in the past for making the statement I'm going to make now. But because I believe it is a correct statement, I'm going to make it. And it is this: criminals must feel afraid. criminals cannot be allowed to feel in charge, that they dictate our movements, when we move, where we can go to, at what time we can do that. And as it is now, they are saying that they are in charge 24/7. It has to be reversed. No doubt about that. So this measure is one part of the process of reversal. This one measure has to work. There has to be some discernible difference. If there is no discernible difference, then it is useless. There are those who say that it ought to be island-wide. Well, my comment on that is this, that if the resources are available, then it ought to be island-wide. Ought to be island-wide. Some people look at the 1976 state of emergency in one light, others in another. But at the time, it was felt that the state of emergency was necessary island-wide because crime had become a major problem. And if my memory serves me right, I think it was 150 murders in 1976. Now we're having 150 per month. It was 150 for the year. So I believe that it behoves us all to be supportive. Now, the security forces so far, from all the reports available to me, have been performing their duties professionally. And that is necessary because the moment the security forces fail to carry out their duties in accordance with the law, there is going to be a significant portion of the society who are going to pull back. They are going to pull back because they feel that they too can become victims of the security forces, and they will argue, I'm a victim of the criminals, a measure has been put in to deal with that, and now I am a victim of the behavior of the security forces. So it is incumbent on all of us to be very supportive and to give words of encouragement to the security forces so that they keep acting professionally. Mr. President, there are certain things which in my mind must be given some priority at this time, because the security forces, however professional, however adept they are at carrying out their functions, they need support from the people, community support. And I have always felt that every measure available should be put in place to garner that community support. And so, Minister, Senator Charles, there are two programs that were aimed at really involving communities in this fight. One of them was called the Community Consultative Committee. And that came out of the Wolf Task force report. And it worked. It worked. Revisit. Because how it used to be put in those days was that the community must buy into measures. They must see themselves as architects of these measures, and they must see themselves as monitors to see if they are working. They must have complete involvement. So at the same time that we're putting in these powers, work assiduously to ensure that you get community support. Another measure that worked was the Neighborhood Watch program. That was a program that was introduced into Jamaica by a gentleman who was then a superintendent, Mr. Neville Wheatle, in 1988. It's a police initiative. He went away on some course, saw it working in a foreign state, and he came back, spoke to his commissioner about it, and in November 1988, it was launched at, in West Central St. Andrew, Mall Road, the first one. And people are apprehensive about it, about Neighborhood Watch. As a matter of fact, at the launch of that Neighborhood Watch, the Commissioner of Police was there. And the only other politician who was there was the then spokesman on national security. The minister wasn't there. Wasn't there. But over the... No, I was saying that at that Mall Road launch, the Commissioner of Police was there. And the only other recognizable politician who was there was the then spokesman on national security. The minister was not there. But the force embraced it, and it helped. It helped. You're not going to be able to, emergency powers or not, you're not going to be able to just move into any community and come out with 50 and 60 guns, even though there are about 120 inside there. It's not going to work. It can't happen. The people must feel that the time has come for them to be so involved and to show that they are not going to accommodate criminality in their communities anymore because it is bad for them. So some of these people who are in these communities who their son ain't working, grandson ain't working, but they can carry home money. Their girlfriend ready to buy jewelry and all that. But the man who provided not working. And he killing somebody just down the road. So people must begin to understand now, listen, this piece of jewelry, not all that valuable, My life is more valuable, and so I'm going to join with the forces, the security forces. Notice I don't say join with the government. I'm going to join with the security forces. And for a particular reason, I don't say join with the government. Because once you begin to speak that way, join with the government, you begin to introduce politics. And some people are going to say, I'm not joining with the Labour right. I'm not joining with the socialists them. I'm not doing it. So the entreaty is to join with the security forces to make you safer. So I'm just saying, whilst you have this, see if you can beef up community involvement. And I'm not going to deal at all today with the social services and some of the social interventions that you have through the IDB program and the CEDA program and so on. I deal with that, but those are necessary. I'm dealing at a different level today. We complain, I've been hearing complaints, Minister, coming from certain quarters about persons who have been charged, taken to court, admitted to bail, and whilst on bail, allegedly committing other offenses. And I have heard that the policy is going to be to amend the Bail Act to put in certain provisions on it. Now, all I'm saying is on that, think carefully, because it was done before. It was done before, and the courts ruled that it was in breach of the Constitution. So don't make the same mistake again. Don't make the same mistake. Well, you know, I happen to know a little about the passage of the Bail Act. It has a simple section, section 20, simple section. And it says this: the minister may by order declare any facility to be a bail center for the purpose of this act. And let me tell you why it has come to my mind. We are talking about how many persons have been taken into custody, how many persons have been charged, and some of those charged are going to be admitted to bail. And if we start now to say, well, the police are taking in these people and the courts are releasing them, we begin again to segment the support for this kind of measure. So we need now to see what is it that we can do. It doesn't take long. I know that at one stage in the 90s, there used to be a discussion between the Minister of National Security and a number of leaders, denominational leaders. And one of the things discussed was the bail centers. And many of them were willing to be participants in such a program. And why was it that it was thought that these bail centers could be helpful? Because depending on the service provided, it was a means of occupying those on bail and reduce the time available for them to become recidivists. Think about it. Another aspect to it was this, that, you know, I don't mean it, what I'm about to say, I don't mean it in any unkind way. But I believe it's realistic. And it is this. There are some people, some youngsters growing up in the society without any kind of parental or other guidance. There's none. They do not, many of them, know right from wrong. They can't distinguish it. they are oblivious of ethical conduct and behavior. They don't know. And so what do? They do what they see being done around them. But the human being, that mind can be trained. And the human being is capable of understanding with the necessary inculcation that what is being done is wrong and there is a different path. So, if, for example, persons who are admitted to bail, a condition is that they must go to a bail center to report. Instead of just going to the police station at 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock and leaving and going about the business. You have to go to a bail center. And at the bail center, certain provisions are made to see if those persons who are in need of it are given some, supposed to be a fiction. Godfather is not to mean that persons are to adopt that kind of behavior. But if you are young and you look at because thank you, Catherine. I saw you say yes. There was a movie called Blackboard Jungle, starring Sidney Poitier. Blackboard Jungle. And let me tell you something. In those days, it was shown at or Tropical. One of the two. Let me tell you.
You were still in St. Elizabeth at the time, girl. You don't know about that. Senator Knight, 1 minute, please. Leader. The leader's time, the speaker's time was expired.
No, well,
You want to just, oh, the 120. Okay.
2 minutes. I'm going to finish. I'm just going to finish.
All right. President, the speaker's time having expired, might it be extended to allow him to complete his presentation?
The question is that the speaker be permitted time to complete his very useful and informative presentation. Those in favor? Against? Thank you, Senator Knight.
Yeah, Blackboard Jungle. It was about a school, I think it was in New York, where truant children, and they're doing all kinds of wrongs and so on. No, we weren't supposed to see it because there was a not below so-and-so age. 21. Or something like that. But I was still at school. And I don't know how I got to go with some bigger fellas and we watched the movie. And let me tell you, the first thing, when I went to school the Monday, the first thing came into my mind was, how do I kind of show off? So my teacher is passing by, and I said, "Hi, teach." Exact words used in the movie. But I knew I couldn't go further than that. Because if I went further than that, I would be thrown out of Woolmer's Boys School where I went. But there are some students who attend school, Woolmer's, and they are influenced by what is around them. They are influenced by what they see on what do you call this thing now? Cable. All these things. So we have to go deep into the minds to get a change. So when you said, I think it was you, Minister, who said, this is not a panacea. It is not, but it is a part of the process. It's a part of. My time having expired, my conscience tells me that I am not to trespass too much on the kindness extended, and so I'm going to end by saying, Mr. Mike Henry always speaks about the census. I don't know how many Jamaicans we have, but every Jamaican and any Jamaican who listens to these deliberations and anyone who I can persuade, I am saying, listen, we have to work together to change the ways of those who are heartless. It can't continue this way. You can't have a situation where 1,600 persons are murdered in a country with 2.8 million people. And I am not talking about who not going to come to Jamaica and all that. I'm talking about who live here. I don't have nowhere going but my yard. I ain't going to any other country to live. And so I'm concerned about my rock. And every Jamaican must be concerned about his or her rock and make this place a safer place for yourself and others. That's my call to my people in my country.
Thank you, Senator Knight. And it is perhaps appropriate that during, or just as you started your presentation, we were joined by a host of young Jamaicans and their teachers from the McIntosh Memorial Primary School in Manchester. So I want you to give yourself a round of applause. For traveling to your Senate to view the sitting today and for arriving safely. So welcome to the Senate, and I hope you enjoy the day's proceedings. And to your teachers, thank you very much for bringing the youngsters, and we trust that you will have a safe journey home when you leave us. Thank you very much again for coming. Leave them alone. Enthusiastic. Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this January 2018, between the dates, the 22nd to the 26th, saw increased tourist arrivals by over 13.5% over the same period last year. And this is a very interesting point to note, because what this is saying is that even in the face of our challenging crime problem, Jamaica continues to enjoy significant appeal as a tourist destination. Mr. President, were we to change the crime statistics, Jamaica would enjoy huge benefits in all areas of development. And it is an outrage that we are holding ourselves back. According to the Most Honourable Prime Minister Andrew Holness, crime is a weight on the economy and a major obstacle for us achieving growth. Mr. President, I support the resolution to extend the state of emergency in St. James. We as a nation must confront crime if we hope to advance, if we hope to attract investors, if we hope to have a good image internationally, and if we want our citizens to prosper. Mr. President, this is going to demand the collective vision and will of every Jamaican here and abroad to bring about the change that we seek. Mr. President, who has the answer? We have had numerous commissioners of police, ministers of national security, high-profile police whose names evoked fear, scores of anti-crime fighting squads, many well-written and impressive-sounding crime plan, yet today we are facing an upsurge in crime that can only be described as demonic. Mr. President, no one name will bring about a miracle. No one person has the formula. The rest of us cannot fold our arms and say, oh, let's wait and see what the minister is going to do. Let's wait and see what the government is going to do. Yes, they lead on policy, they lead on strategy. However, there has to be support and cooperation from the wider society. And Jamaica must get its act together or we will get left behind. The world is not waiting on us. We have to be at the bargaining table ready for business. So the anything goes, free for all, do as I please, has no place in a modern society. Rules, structure, order, accountability, deliverables are the tenets of a developed and business-driven country. And this is what we have to become now, today, not 10 years from now. Mr. President, our nation cannot continue to afford the burdening cost that crime fighting incurs. For the fight to be effective, all systems must work for optimal results. We must change the crime culture. Senators, a man might say, me a no murderer, me a just a mango thief. Another person may say, but I just want like a blind me give him and him knows I'm supposed to run back a food. You know the thing set. When we have a society that thinks like this, we are in trouble. It is this loose culture that breeds criminals. Systems must work effectively. You know, Mr. President, a simple scenario. Miss Brown is in charge of a department that issues permits for whatever. Miss Brown goes on leave. Another person in the system says, you know what, she's on leave for 2 months. And right there, you know, you can start sneaking some things through the system and they charge her money. Simple things like that, and people seem to think that it's okay because I'm not shooting anyone. It's not. Mr. President, a matter that I feel strongly about is that when trouble starts in Jamaica, when something appears as if, no man, it's not so bad, very few people fail to identify the far-reaching effects. And therefore, someone who attempts to clamp down, you'll hear someone say, Lord youth, nothing wrong with that. Give him a blind. The problem in St. James did not begin last year, nor the year before. I wish we had Senator Sinclair here. Everybody's crying. I can't believe what is happening in St. James. But I have some questions. When young boys, Senator Knight, some as young as 15 years old, were said to be building mansions in St. James. Didn't we see this coming? When they were shelling down the clubs and the parties, when they were burning thousands of dollars, spending a fortune on money pull up, wash car with champagne. Didn't we see this coming? The business people are crying, they are complaining. When these boys were buying out hardwares, when these boys were buying out furniture stores, when these boys were buying out car mats, week after week, they could hardly supply the demand. Weren't we alarmed? People who had no otherwise good means of earning. Who are the people on their pay bill? Who did they control? Where were the watchmen for the city? Did they fall asleep? Did they not see it? The mothers, the wives, the girlfriends, what was your share? Didn't you know? Didn't you know that when them can't catch Harry, you're going to become Harry shot? And so the song said, big money popping anywhere we go. Didn't you know? I wonder how much of this money, if at all, was used to finance any political campaign. I don't know. Mr. President, St. James was a problem that was waiting to happen. And we should have trampled it from the get-go. Mr. President, what is happening now must never happen again anywhere in Jamaica. I heard someone say recently, too many of us as Jamaicans support foolishness and loose behavior. And when things get out of control, we start ball. Run up and down, can't manage. Mr. President, where are the parents who have the courage to say, don't come in my yard with that? I am going to be the first one to call the police. Where are the relatives who are not prepared to hide any gunmen in their homes? Where are they? Mr. President, everyone can recount the gruesome murder rate. Everyone is touched by it. Jamaicans living abroad, I understand your fear. I understand your frustration. Jamaica is your home, the place where you plan to retire. Many of you are working in extreme weather to build your homes right here. You long to come to your yard. You long to come and help to build your economy by supporting us here at home. And my heart grieves for that couple from St. Thomas, the returning residents who were murdered weeks ago in their home. A couple that spoke only of coming back home to Jamaica, land of their birth where they love, that they love. And I'm using this medium on behalf of all of us to extend condolences to the family and indeed to all the families that are grieving. And I promise you on behalf of this administration, Senator Charles, and also on behalf of the opposition too, because we are working together on this, that we are going to fix this. It may not be overnight. It is going to take courage. It is going to take perseverance, but we are going to fix this.
Mr. President, the time being 1:20, might the standing orders be suspended to allow the Senate to complete the business of the day?
The question is, the time is 1:20 p.m. May the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 p.m. to complete the business of the day. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jamaicans living overseas, we need your support in this fight. We ask you not to enable criminals. We ask you to help us to cut off any type of support on which they thrive. And it begins with your own family. You see how hard you have to work? Rain or snow, you have to go to work and you can't be late. It's not like Jamaica where you can just go and pick 2 apples or a neighbor give you a hand of bananas. You have to go to work in order to eat and pay the bills. So you cannot send back your hard-earned money to Jamaica to support foolishness. Mr. President, I urge them I urge them to encourage those who may seek their support for wrongdoings. Tell them to call you for help to go back to school. Tell them to call you for help to learn a skill. Tell them to call you for help to do a business, help for lunch money and transportation for school. Try something, find something to do. Don't call you about just clothes and shoes and phone. Monitor them. If they say they are going to class, you need to see the result. Mr. President, sometimes, they even call and say, we want money to do business, we want money to raise chicken. And when you go and you check, they neither have chicken nor the cob. No. That happened. Yes. Indeed, I heard a story about a man who has sent thousands to help with cattle rearing, and when he came back to Jamaica, all he saw was the empty land. And when they asked him, so what happened to the cow? He said, disease kill all of them. Right? And that kind of trickery going on. Mr. President, more seriously, a concerned citizen asks the question, I have seen other state of emergency in Jamaica. Is this just a temporary fix? Is this just to cool down things? Will we go back to this 3 years from now? It's a valid question. And this state of emergency is not used as a solution. It is intended to immediately clamp down and cauterize, but it will be supported by a sustainable, long-term, holistic, systematic system of security that will include the voice of the people. We cannot divorce the issue of crime from the conditions in which people live, and therefore, in support of the Prime Minister's position, we will consider social, economic, and cultural factors as we adopt a new brand which will see a structured, organized, and precise approach where citizens will have confidence in the police and confidence in the justice system. It's not just about catching criminals who do the legwork. It is also about finding their financiers, cutting off their supply system, and uprooting the problem. And Senator Charles, we have to mention the issue with the abuse of children. There are several things which contribute to this. And I am of the belief that when a man molests a child, any kind of sexual assault on children must be treated with the penalty must be severe, and the penalty must serve as a deterrent. I cannot understand how a man can be attracted to bubbles and clip. I just cannot understand it, Mr. President. And when it comes to the protection of our children, we have to take it very seriously. A responsibility of government is to protect its citizens, and Minister Montague has my full support. The challenge to Prime Minister Holness, is to overhaul the security system and to make it robust and comparable with developed standards. We cannot fight high-tech criminals with pickaxe. We cannot fight high-tech criminals with pickaxe, or they will be light years ahead of us. Mr. President, I urge citizens to get involved in building their communities. Get involved in your citizens association, your neighborhood watch, sports club. Interact with the youths, listen to them, influence them positively. That's a part of crime fighting. The truth is that big men gave up their communities to little boys. We left vulnerable spaces for criminals to take over. And when a community is united, criminals cannot thrive there. Young men and women, be wise. What does it profit you to gain all the material things and lose your life? Why waste your life fighting for a man who calls himself Don? Mr. President, they need to realize, our young people need to realize they have a choice. Progress and prosperity, or 9-night, rum, Pepsi, chariot funeral. Seems to be a competition now to see who will get the biggest night or funeral. I urge the young people, choose life. When we lose our men to violence, what are we, the women, to do? We need our men as role models, as fathers, partners, protectors. We need you in our churches. We need you in our homes and in our lives. Mr. President, we have to save our boys. We do not want to see a generation of boys who do not understand what it means to be a man. I thank the citizens who are cooperating with the security forces. For the most part, our citizens have been able to go about their usual business, even as we arrest criminals, and this is what is called intelligent crime fighting. We depend on entertainment and cultural activities. Many Jamaicans earn their bread from entertainment, and that is one of the reasons we cannot let criminals shut down our country. Mr. President, for its intent and purpose, and for it even signaling the beginning of a comprehensive approach to crime fighting, I support the resolution to extend the state of emergency in St. James. May it so please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I wish to thank all members of the Senate who contributed to the presentations today, to the debate on the motion. I do not wish to extend the debate longer. I simply wish to make a correction. There was an assertion earlier that the Zosos have failed because there was a murder in Denham Town. And just for Hansard and for clarity for those who listen as well, I just want to point out that the murder was not within the zone, and the entire Denham Town is not within the zone, and therefore the reported crime to which the senator referred was actually not there. There have been no murders or other serious crimes in either of the zones created. I wanted that to be clear for the record, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just, in wrapping up, wish to again share and associate myself with the comments made by members regarding the need for unity, the need for cooperation, the need for support of the security forces, the need for unity among communities, and the need for us all to work together as a people if it is that we are to eliminate the scourge of crime. I want to make it clear that the government understands and has asserted that the state of emergency is one part of the strategy against crime. We know that the 5-pillar strategy that has been spoken to by the Minister and the Prime Minister and other stakeholders on several occasions deals with the current issues, that is the present crime problem. It deals with the prevention of crime by addressing opportunities for young people. It deals with rehabilitation of our young people by looking at the correctional services, and it deals with rehabilitation as well and prevention of recidivism. Within that realm, in addition to Plan Secure Jamaica, which is also dealing with border security, the investment in boats as well as aircraft and drones to police our borders and stop the inflow of guns. Everybody is quite clear Jamaica does not make guns. They're coming from somewhere. And it is important that even as we find and get the guns in Jamaica, that we also prevent additional guns and ammunition from entering our ports, police and unpoliced. In this regard, Mr. President, the voice of the communities, the voice of the wives, the mothers, the girlfriends, the friends, the relatives who know where the guns are hidden, who know that they can, we want to remind them that they can call 311. We want to remind them that they can call 311. The calls are not answered in Jamaica. They are secure, they are confidential, and they are a way for you to play your part confidentially and anonymously. And we encourage every citizen who takes that step to contribute. Tell us where the guns are so we can get them. There is no caller ID. There is absolutely no caller ID. They cannot tell who or from where you are calling. They cannot trace it. There's a JDF number in St. James, Mr. President. I mentioned it earlier. It is 837-8888, and it is monitored again 24 hours confidentially by the Jamaica Defense Force. So again, we encourage persons who are in communities in St. James. If you know that the gunman leave your community, don't think that just because he's gone, he won't come back. If you know where he's gone, share the information, and we will act on that information, Mr. President. Persons, fugitives from St. James have been found. Wanted men have been found who have fled and then been brought to justice since. Mr. President, it was made quite clear on the announcement of the state of emergency that the aim, the operational aim of the state is to disrupt the criminal networks and to force them to ground, to curtail and to cauterize the spike in violence, and that has in fact occurred within the parish. It is one step, it is part of an arsenal of tools, and it is one which we feel confident that its extension will demonstrate the results that have been called for, will demonstrate additional faith in the operations being undertaken. And in that context, Mr. President, I now move for a vote on the motion. Thank you.
The Minister has put the motion, and the question is that the motion be approved. Madam Clerk.
Senator Briam? Yes. Senator Brown? Yes. Senator Charles? Yes. Senator Crawford? Senator Fraser-Binns? Senator Gale? Yes. Senator Hill? Yes. Senator Johnson-Smith? Yes. Senator Knight? Senator Longmore? Yes. Senator Morris? Senator Morrison? Yes. Senator Reid? Yes. Senator Samuda? Yes. Senator Scott Motley? Senator Sinclair, yes. Senator Skeffrey, Senator Slowly, Senator Webby, Senator Williams. Mr. President. Yes.
The result of the vote, there are 6 members of the Senate absent, all with excuses. There are no noes and 15 ayes. So the ayes have it and the motion is carried with the appropriate vote of 2/3 of the Senate. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the next matter on the agenda is for us to take the companion bills, the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act 2017 and the Indictment Amendment Act 2018. It's now 2018, and the Indictment Act. Mr. President, recently, the Cabinet took a decision to reorder the strategic priorities of the government's medium-term socio-economic policy framework, elevating citizen security and timely delivery of justice from number 2 to number 1. And this was in recognition not of our achievement of all the goals under the priority of inclusive and sustainable economic growth and job creation, but a recognition that the path is well underway with macroeconomic indicators going in the right direction, barring exogenous factors, and noting that while efforts continue to stimulate job creation, we are experiencing the lowest unemployment rate in a decade, as well as the lowest youth unemployment period during that time. But perhaps more importantly, Mr. President, we recognize that all our excellent plans and priorities and strategies are at risk if we do not make serious inroads into the fight against crime and the timely delivery of justice, as the two are strongly interconnected. Mr. President, we can only achieve success in the fight against crime if we also address the challenges facing the criminal justice system. And these challenges were not created overnight. They have crept up, they have built up, they have entrenched themselves. And to some extent, they'll require fundamental shifts. They'll require firm decisions, in addition to resourcing of the Justice Reform Program. But there are also changes to the legislative framework which can address the efficiency with which cases are managed and tried. And the bills placed before the Senate today are intended to have this effect. Mr. President, the bills are aimed, among other things, at the trial of lesser offenses together with the offenses of murder, other than capital murder, on a single indictment by a judge sitting with a jury, the trial of joinable offenses, including those triable by a Supreme Court judge with or without a jury, together on a single indictment by a judge sitting with a jury, the trial of joinable offenses, whether triable on indictment or summarily, together on a single indictment in the Supreme Court, the trial of joinable offenses arising under different enactments, which are triable by judge sitting alone, together on a single indictment in the Supreme Court by judge sitting alone. And the courts, at the conclusion of a criminal trial, Mr. President, if there is clear evidence that a victim has suffered loss as a result of the crime inflicted by the convicted offender, to make an order that the convicted offender make restitution for the victim's loss. Mr. President, the current state of the law as it relates to how certain matters progress through the courts is an impediment to the timely delivery of justice. The stratification of criminal offenses creates the phenomenon we refer to as jurisdictional silos, where offenses are tried at different levels of the court based on their nature and prescribed penalties. This, Mr. President, prevents the courts from trying all offenses that may arise on the facts before the courts, notwithstanding that the allegations may disclose that all offenses occurred substantially at the same time. The effect of this practice is that oftentimes offenses arising from the same factual matrix are tried independently in separate proceedings, thereby creating unnecessary inefficiencies in the criminal justice system. Mr. President, this jurisdictional silo was created by legislation and the classification of criminal offenses as either indictable or summary. Indictable offenses are governed by the Indictments Act and are so designated because of the originating document, that is, the document, the indictment used to charge the offender. Indictable offenses are generally tried in the circuit court, with some exceptions as stated by the Judicature Parish Courts Act. Under this Act, certain specified indictable offenses are triable in the parish court. Mr. President, summary offenses, on the other hand, are triable in the parish court, or in the cases of very minor offenses, the Petty Sessions Court. There are exceptional offenses that can be tried either on an indictment in the Supreme Court or summarily in the parish court. And there are also a few other offenses that are triable either way in the parish court or on an indictment or summarily. Mr. President, by Rule 3 of the Schedule to the Indictments Act, charges for any offenses, whether felonies or misdemeanors, may be joined in the same indictment if those charges are a part of a series of offenses of same or similar character and may be tried together. It is to be noted, however, Mr. President, that offenses under the Gun Court Act may be tried by different procedures depending on the gravity of the offense. Some offenses are triable by jury, but some are triable by judge alone. For summary offenses, Section 22 of the Criminal Justice Administration Act sets out, among other things, that two or more offenses arising out of acts so connected as to form the same transaction can be tried together. But, Mr. President, notwithstanding these provisions of the Indictments Act and the Criminal Justice Administration Act, both acts are silent on whether summary and indictable offenses can be tried together in the same proceedings. Further, the Court of Appeal has declared that a joint trial of summary and indictable offenses is a nullity. Additionally, Mr. President, the courts have ruled that matters triable under the special statutory summary jurisdiction of the parish courts cannot be tried jointly with matters triable under the petty sessions jurisdiction of that court. So, Mr. President, with that brief summary, one can appreciate the difficulties faced by the prosecution when an accused is charged with both indictable and summary offenses arising out of the same facts. The prosecutor then becomes burdened by the need to decide which offense is to be tried first and which court has jurisdiction. By extension, the fate of the accused is delayed. You may have an accused who committed a series of offenses under the same circumstances and was tried for one offense in one court and is awaiting trial for another offense in another court, but because of the classification, despite the fact, of course, again, same circumstances, same crimes. Mr. President, this system only serves to delay the trials of accused persons and to clog the justice system. Mr. President, if we're serious about improving our justice system, we must seize every opportunity to make the changes necessary to contribute to these improvements, These amendments are low-hanging fruit, and everyone, particularly the accused persons, stand to benefit. Mr. President, let me hasten to point out that the amendments being tabled will also benefit victims of crime through the provision for an order for payment of restitution by convicted persons to victims. Currently, where the victim of a crime suffers loss and/or damage as a result of the criminal acts of the accused, the victim has to initiate separate legal proceedings in the civil court in order to claim compensation. And this can result in further delays, inefficient use of the court's resources, and, of course, injustice to the victim. In recognition of this, the government has in recent times sought to remedy this by including provisions in legislation to allow the court to make orders at the end of a criminal trial for restitution to be made to the victims by convicted persons. Section 17 of the Law Reform Fraudulent Transactions Act, Special Provisions Act 2013, that's the Lottery Scamming Act, and of the Section 6 of the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act, as amended in 2013, are examples. These provisions, however, are specific only to the offenses created under the respective legislation, and there remains a void to be filled generally. Mr. President, this amendment to the Criminal Justice Administration Act will remedy this loophole. A judge in a criminal trial will be empowered to order generally that a convicted person make restitution to the victim of his crime. This restitution will serve to compensate the victim for actual losses, and it is not intended to abridge the victim's rights to sue the convicted person in the civil court for damages should they also see fit. It is envisioned that with the award for losses, the victim will be placed at a minimum in the position he would have been in had the crime not been committed. These amendments, Mr. President, will be a boon to the justice system. Mr. President, I will now highlight the main features of the bill. Mr. President, the clause 2 amends Rule 3 of the schedule to the, in respect of the Indictments Act, let me take that first. Clause 2 amends Rule 3 of the schedule to the Indictments Act to allow for the joinder of offenses that are so connected to form part of the same transaction despite their classification. The prosecution will have the discretion to decide whether to join any offenses, but the court will still have the power to order that they be tried separately if, one, there is a risk of injustice, or two, the administration of justice is better served by the separation. Mr. President, as it relates to murder, the amendment allows non-capital murder to be tried together with lesser offenses on a single indictment by a judge sitting with a jury. Further, where the joint offenses are a mix of offenses which are tried by judge sitting alone and judge sitting with jury, the joint offenses may now be tried together on a single indictment by a judge sitting with jury. Mr. President, joint offenses triable by a judge of the Supreme Court, whether with or without a jury, and offenses triable by the parish court may now be tried together on a single indictment in the Supreme Court. Where the joint offenses arise under different pieces of legislation and are each triable by a judge alone, they may be tried on a single indictment in the Supreme Court by a judge sitting alone. Mr. President, in respect of the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act, Clause 2 allows for the joinder of offences triable by the parish courts despite their classification as indictable, summary, or petty sessions. And as long as they are founded on the same fact, arise out of a single act or a series of acts, they form part of a series of offences of the same or similar character, or are so connected to form part of the same transaction, they can be joined at trial. Similar to the position at the Supreme Court, the parish judge will be able to make an order for separate trials. And additionally, appeals for joint offences at the parish court shall be heard by the Court of Appeal. Mr. President, Clause 3 empowers a judge to order a person convicted of any criminal offence to make restitution to the victim of his crime once there is sufficient evidence that the commission of the crime caused the victim loss. Such restitution may mean that the convicted person returns property to the victim, pays for the cost of the property, returns money with interest, pays for medical bills or lost income, or even attorney's fees. And this restitution, Mr. President, may be enforced by the victim or prosecution on behalf of the victim. An amendment was made in the Lower House to indicate that the restitution order will not prejudice the victim's right to any civil action as long as it is brought within 2 years after the date of the restitution order. One can see, Mr. President, how this not only helps balance the justice system in favor of the victim, but the amendments also, Mr. President, make it quite clear how we can unclog the backlog, or in fact, slow down this constant build-up that we experience every year by eliminating the number of trials that need to be had around the same crimes. Mr. President, Clause 4 of the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Bill repeals Section 54 of the Principal Act to make provisions to widen the minister's powers to make regulations. And Clause 5 provides that on the repeal of Section 54, well, it works with the same in respect of regulations to award compensation to victims of crime. Clause 6 amends Section 5 of the Gun Court Act to allow for the joinder of offences under the Act with other offences as long as those other offences are triable by jury. Mr. President, during the first debate on July 18, 2017, the Attorney General had requested that this clause be amended to make non-capital gun murders triable by judge alone. But the proposed amendment was not accepted, and as such, the debates were suspended on that matter. When the bills were next presented to the Lower House, the proposed amendment to the Gun Court Act for judge alone trials was removed, and the original provision retained as approved originally. That is, that the judge in the gun court can try matters before him as long as they are triable by jury. So, Mr. President, this ends the clause-by-clause summary of the bills before you, and I now commend these bills to the members of the Senate for their approval. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, it is very interesting that we should be taking these two bills right after the discussion which we just had about the state of emergency. Because after all, they say without justice, there can be no peace. And one of the complaints which we have heard since time immemorial is that justice delayed is also justice denied. There is no gainsaying that persons feel frustrated about the way that our system functions. That is not to say that the efforts have not been made through successive administrations to improve the delivery of justice to the citizenry. Indeed, I do believe that this bill is a bill which had in fact been crafted by my predecessor in the Senate, the Honourable Mark Golding, as he was then. And I do believe that we all should champion any effort to simplify the delivery of justice to the people. I do support the initiative, although as somebody who has practiced in the criminal courts, I am loath to tamper with certain provisions. And I therefore am delighted to hear from the leader that after much discussion it was agreed that one should not affect the rights of trial by jury in certain instances. I ask a question, however, Mr. President, especially when I look at the Criminal Justice Administration Act. I ask, when it is that we consider that the administration of justice would be better served if the offenses are tried separately, whether we sufficiently take into account the justice that belongs to the accused man. I hope it is only in the administering of this legislation that we will come to be able to pass judgment on that. You, Mr. President, are in the criminal courts much more often than most people here, except perhaps my learned colleague to the left.
He's in Cuba.
We do know that from time to time, when certain offenses are deliberated, a judge has in a casual way called in the complainant into court or the victim or family of the victim and discussed restitution. That, of course, has never been enforceable, although you would be surprised to see the alacrity with which it is that offer of restitution is responded to by the accused person's family, and usually those funds are provided immediately. There are some issues, however, surrounding this matter. And the question which we are raising is, how appropriate is it for it to be codified as it is being done now? And what if the restitution is not paid immediately? What are the recourses? How does it affect the right which has been preserved? And I'm delighted to see that it has been here, where it says that it is no prejudice to a civil action, although the caveat has been added that that action must be taken within 2 years, outside of the normal statute of limitations. But how, if this order is made in court in a manner similar to a judgment in a civil court, how is it enforced if there's no follow-through on...
I'm not really supposed to do this, you know. But don't the magistrates already routinely do it prior to sentence as a method of mitigation?
Not just prior to sentence in the parish courts. It has been used as a tool in other courts. But you raise a very important point, Mr. President, because it is usually in the context of a guilty plea. And when in fact they say that because the mediator sort of approach has become more and more accepted in the courts, when the person pleads guilty as part of the ameliorating of the sentence, the court will say, what are your expenses, for example? That is the most favored. What sort of inconvenience did you endure? And take it from there in terms of order and compensation. Now, the difference in this is that because it is structured, it raises other issues. So that's why I raise the question of how is it enforced? Because it's no longer an informal sort of thing. You leave from there, you can see your attorney, you can sue for whatever. But here now, where it is part of the law, we have to be clear about how it is going to be administered. Mr. President, the time frame which has been designated here is in relation to the time that the action. It is, in other words, this does not prejudice your right to taking civil action. And I assume that one would be very clear about the principles of how you compensate. In other words, if restitution has in fact been made of, say, medical expenses, I assume, and it is right so to do, that you could not therefore proceed to the civil courts and claim again for medical expenses because you would have already been compensated. The amendment to the Gun Court Act is, I think, a good amendment because it will actually prevent the necessity of having several different hearings in relation to the offenses. So where any offense that the court has a jurisdiction to hear is joined with another offense, and that other offense is triable by jury, the court may also hear and determine that other offense, or if the accused pleads guilty to the offense, accept the plea and sentence the accused accordingly. That is a consequential amendment. And I'm sure that this is something that perhaps we will have different views from the lawyers because this is always a very contentious point which is debated. Mr. President, I have an understanding with the leader as to the time that we are going to spend on this. I was a little bit taken aback that in the Act to Amend the Indictments Act, we actually had a clause that made reference to the discretion of the prosecution to determine whether or not to join any offense pursuant to this rule, because it's totally surplus. I'm not able to get out that word today, but I assure you I do know the meaning and I do know the word I intend to use because the prosecution has always had that right to determine whether or not to join any offense pursuant to once there's an indictment, that is always a right of the prosecution to determine how to proceed. It might not meet with the approval of the court, and in fact, this is what the clause actually says, that the judge may make an order that they should not be charged on the same, jointly on the same indictment, but that a separate indictment should be proffered against the accused man. Mr. President, I've always been fascinated by the term a substantial risk of injustice, although I know it's part of our legal lexicon. A substantial risk of injustice? It should be any risk of injustice. How do you determine the levels of injustice? It has been adopted and used so often that I suppose now we get a standard as to what it means, but a substantial risk of injustice. I would say that any risk of injustice is something that we should all frown on, and that if we are trying to move things forward, if we are going into a new direction as we are every day, where we are bringing into place things like mediation, restorative justice, and so on. Maybe it is time that we allow the persons who are accused to recognize that we will not tolerate any kind of injustice to be meted out to them. Mr. President, I had started to say that I had an understanding, some informal agreement, but I do know that the senator to my left would never feel justified if he did not make an intervention. And having regard to his seniority in the courts and his years of experience and the fact that he bears the distinguished title of Queen's Counsel, I shall make sure that I end at this stage to allow him, unless somebody on that side also wishes to intervene, to make an intervention. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Scottman. Senator Knight?
You didn't want to again? You changed them?
Thank you, President. President, let me make myself quite clear. Had it been Senator Mark Golding sitting to my right, I would have told him I don't wish to speak. But since it is not, and since it is who it is, I feel obliged. Two quick points. One, simple. I too support the view that the statute should make, the bill should make it very clear that it is on a guilty plea that the restitution can be made. And I tell you why. Because let us say that the person is found guilty and the restitution order is made, and then the person appeals. What is the situation there? If that accused succeeds at the appellate level, then the amount, the restitution, the so-called restitution made, ought not to have been made. So you're inviting that person now, that accused, to recover from the then complainant. So I think it should on. Pardon me?
You wouldn't pay.
No, but that's the point, because you need not give verbal notice of appeal, so that at that stage, the parish judge would not know whether you're going to appeal or not. You follow? So a difficulty could arise, because then the accused person would have to institute civil proceedings if successful at the appellate stage. And, you know, so I just think it might create a little problem and could cause some difficulties down the road, because a person is the accused. The person who got the money might be very, very reluctant to repay, or may not be in a position to repay. So I would just like that little issue to be dealt with, that it is on a guilty plea. You know, I'm appealing to see if there, but there's no reaction.
No, them said no. Them said no.
Think about it. Because once you say on a guilty plea, that's it. There's no problem. But if there's going to be... No, because you'd have already paid. No, let me explain. Let me explain to you what happens in the criminal courts. Because what happens is this. The judge, the sentencing judge, is going to take into account the restitution in the passage of the sentence. So what happens now is that you pay it, the sentence is imposed. But the accused now goes to a lawyer, maybe a different lawyer, or the same lawyer consults, or whatever, and says, look here, we have grounds of appeal. We have grounds of appeal. And a confusion arises. But if there's a plea of guilty, then the only appeal can be on sentence. You follow? So if the person, for example, is sentenced to a custodial sentence and still has to make restitution, there might be an appeal there. You can't guard against that. That kind of consequence flows naturally, and they're at risk. But the likelihood is that, you see, in our society, we have to take note of it. You're going to have problems with it, you know. People are going to want to fight. People are going to want to chop up each other and all that. When they said, "May win my appeal. I wasn't guilty. I want back my money. I want it now." All kind of problems. So think about it in the meantime. And the one other point I have is the joinder in the Supreme Court of a matter triable in the parish court. If there is that joinder and there is a verdict of guilty, what is the sentence that is going to be imposed by the Supreme Court judge? Is it the sentence that is applicable to the parish court? Can't be, because the statute is going to say that this sentence is applicable to the parish judge. If convicted in a parish court, the sentence is X years. Now you go upstairs. What's the sentence? I don't know. I'm just asking. Because the Supreme Court can't now impose a sentence which is applicable to the parish court. There's no jurisdiction to do that. And is it then that you would, it would be an offense without the allocation of any sentence? So I suppose you'd have to now leave that to the inherent jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. I don't like it. I don't like it. I think it needs a little tidying there, because there is going to be great uncertainty. I might find a situation where the Supreme Court judge just simply cannot sentence. And then, in terms of the restitution, the limitation period of 2 years. You see, you have another difficulty, because there are some appeals that take longer than 2 years to come up. So I don't think you should disturb the normal limitation period provide by statute of limitations. I can't see any good reason why you reduce it. Those are my questions, really.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Leader of Opposition Business, as well, for keeping within the bounds of our discussion. Just to say, in respect of the matter of enforcement of orders, which I believe was the first query raised, that would be addressed under 3.4, which 3.4 of the Criminal Justice Administration Amendment Act, which states specifically that the restitution order may be enforced by the victim or by the prosecution on behalf of the victim in the same manner as a judgment in civil action. And there's also a provision which allows for the making of regulations to deal with the procedures and the guidelines around execution of this new process. That was the first question that was asked about enforcement of the order. So that has been addressed. But the technical team is also suggesting that under the regulation making power under 65, that guidelines can be given to reduce the risk of which you have spoken. Sorry. In respect of the question regarding the sentence that would be applied to a particular charge, the legislation before us is intended to reduce the number of trials that you need to have in respect of particular matters arising from the same set of facts. But it doesn't change the sentencing framework that exists for the particular charges. It changes the place where they are charged. Yes. So, in the current framework, it does that. But the fact is that the joinder that's now being permitted will not change the actual sentence that attached to the charge in its...
The new venue can do it, is what you're saying.
The new venue, the location of the new trial, the new location of the trial will simply apply what would have been applied elsewhere on the former offenses. It's within the broader, it is the policy framework. Remember, we're changing how it operates now, you know. We're not keeping the same thing. And it's actually changing the system to allow the trials to be had without actually changing your sentencing framework in respect of the matters. Let me go back to the issue of how to prevent double claims. The fact is that if a civil claim is brought in respect of the same circumstances, a judge assessing damages or assessing loss would take any previous payment into consideration. So that will not be an issue. That anticipate will not be an issue. And I'm just noting here that in respect of the prosecution's discretion, which I think was raised, it's been indicated that the amendment is necessary in circumstances to join the indictable and summary offenses, which cannot currently be done. But the prosecution does not have a discretion to do this now. So that is being corrected by this new amendment. I'm noting when processes are being changed, when you're entering into a new way of doing things, there are always challenges and there are always hiccups. The regulation making power should assist with challenges which occur, but I'm also going to just recall your words from an earlier debate where you recall the frustration that you felt in another place at another time when every proposal that was put forward was met with, it can't work. and and the recognition that sometimes you have to try something differently, and you have to make an effort to make it work before you determine that it will fail. So this is to say, the policy framework that has been established and the amendments that have been proposed are before us. And my understanding is that it should work. In that context, it is anticipated that challenges which may occur can be addressed. And certainly, what I would suggest, or what I'd request, is perhaps that you have a discussion with either the Minister of Justice or the Attorney General about the. We are going to pass it today. Challenge it. I would expect nothing less, Senator. Mr. President, I ask for a second reading of the bill. Of the bills, pardon.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the bills, that is to say an act to amend the Indictment Act and an act to amend the Criminal Justice Administrative Act, be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Indictments Act, read a second time. Indictments Act, read a second time. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Justice Administration Act and for connected matters, read a second time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill. That is to say, first of all, the Act to amend the Indictment Act, clause by clause. I put clause 1 of the bill. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2 of the bill. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. Hello. To deal now with the Criminal Justice Amendment Act. And I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2. In favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor?
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman.
In relation to clause 3, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, we have a concern and would like clarification on the clause 3.7. That is where an order under subsection 2 must be brought within 2 years after the order has been made. In the normal course of any kind of civil action, the statute of limitation actually gives you 6 years. And one wonders what would be the justification, what would be the reasoning behind shortening that time to 2 years. If the aim is to administer for the better administration of justice, then the rights should be protected.
You had mentioned earlier about the issue of an appeal. Your problem could be solved if you had provided that the matter is not an appeal.
Well, I don't think it is just a simple matter of whether or not it is appealed. The fact of the matter is that it is well established that you have 6 years to take the action. I would believe, I see no reason why you can't still maintain the 6 years, and that is why I'm seeking clarification, because there must have been a justification for shortening the time in relation to this matter.
I'm advised that this is a policy position that was taken and it was agreed on, of course, in the other place when the vote was taken. I can only surmise, and I don't wish to speculate, but it could be related to the fact that the offense would have occurred sometime before, and that the aim is to balance between the creation of a new cause of action versus an action in respect of something which took place before. But I am thinking about the matter, and so I'm unable to answer you. Safe to say that I have not been given any leeway to make this amendment here. I'm not getting a clear indication of the position behind it, but a clear statement that this was a policy decision put forward when this amendment was moved and accepted in the lower house. So maybe a look at Hansard might help us understand the position that was taken.
You know, one of the problems I faced when I was reading this, the objects and memorandum. I've never seen any, that just don't, when one reads that, one has no idea as to the object.
I'll just ask an additional question, Chairman. Let's say that the trial comes up and the limitation is already completed, run. It would mean then you have an additional 2 years. Is that the idea? I want to know. So, for example, if the offense took place 6 years ago, and then the trial now, for whatever reason, like one that is going on now, is happening in 6 years, you then get a 2-year extension. Is that the idea? It seems that the wording would support it. No? Okay.
I'm proposing, Mr. Chairman, that if we perhaps would be better off and have a better scheme if we just did not include that time limit. I don't see what a time limit does to enhance the provision of the legislation. And if we just said at the instance of the person who has suffered the loss of damage, then it can address all the concerns.
The concern is noted and understood as well, let me assure you of that. Perhaps what we could do is suspend the discussion on this particular clause and continue with the other clauses, and having a call made to the Minister of Justice to see whether there is an explanation that might suit, or whether in the alternative we could consider the amendment which you are putting forward. So if we could perhaps proceed with the other clauses, Mr. President, and hopefully a response will come back in time.
So the question is that we suspend the debate on clause number 3. In favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 4. Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 5. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 6. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. Leader.
Mr. President, I'm happy to advise members of the opposition that there is an agreement that we can remove the time. So the clause would end at the word damage in the penultimate line of that clause.
So, very well. So the
amendment to clause to 3.7, which will now read, or rather in which we will delete all of the words after the word damage and ending at order, so that the clause will read, an order under subsection 2 shall be without prejudice to any civil action which may lie at the instance of the person who has suffered the loss or damage. Full stop.
Thank you. The amendment is put. Those in favor? Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3 as amended. Those in favor? Against? ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill, specifically the Indictment Amendments Act, as having passed committee stage without amendment. And the question is that I do report the bill entitled the Criminal Justice Administrative Amendment Act 2017 to have passed committee stage with one amendment. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I do report the bill entitled Indictment Amendment Act 2017 as having passed committee stage without amendment, and I do report an act, the bill entitled an act to amend the Criminal Justice Administrative Act having passed committee stage with one amendment.
Mr. President, I beg for third reading of the bill.
The question is that the bills be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it.
A bill entitled an act to amend the Indictments Act, read a third time and passed. A bill entitled an act to amend the Criminal Justice Administration Act and for connected matters, read a third time and passed.
Mr. President, at the start of public business, we had asked for suspension of standing orders for the questions, the agenda item questions to be taken after 11:45, and that motion was granted. The member who had asked the questions is now present, and there are copies which can be circulated.
Question is that the agenda items and questions and answers to questions be taken now, recommitted. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Minister Reid. Senator Brown, I think that you have to do something.
I know I too, but maybe, Mr. President, I'd really wish to evaluate later that I'd be willing to accept the answers being tabled if I'm going to be allowed next sitting to, at question time, raise question. It's a proposal I wish to put since given the last one.
It's subject to the ministers. It's subject, Senator Brown. It is subject to the ministers' agreement for that. Minister Reid.
Mr. President, we find favor with that request, so we are now officially tabling the answers to question number 7 in the name of Senator Lambert Brown, and we look forward to him sending me his list of further questions so I can prepare to answer them at the next sitting.
Senator Johnson-Smith.
Mr. President, it is not intended to do any further business today. I ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Well, just before I do that, it was remiss of me not to make mention that to the members of the Senate that the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, our very own Minister Kamina Johnson-Smith, will for the next 6 months preside over the Council of Ministers of the powerful African, Caribbean, and Pacific group. Her tenure begins in February, in fact today, through to July 2018. And it is expected that there are significant developments to take place within that organization during her tenure. And it is expected that her time will culminate with the completion of the negotiations of the position of the ACP with the European Union. So best of luck to you, Madam.
If I may, with your leave, Mr. President, but just to point out that this will be the 6th time that Jamaica is taking the presidency in the 43 years of the organization, and Senator Knight has also served in that position as well. So, in fact, I have the most lovely collage that someone created and sent from the ACP this morning that I want to share with Senator Knight, because it has a photo of former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson, who served in that capacity, former Prime Minister Hugh Shearer, who served in that capacity, former Foreign Minister K.D. Knight, former Foreign Minister K.D. Knight, and myself, and it's sort of walking through the annals of history that Jamaica continues to play its role among the African, Caribbean, and Pacific states, and I am proud, honored, and humbled to take that role today. Thank you.
You could share it with all of us. You don't have to just keep it between you and Senator Knight. We'd like to see it.
We need to change
May
the definition of the ACP.
President, I need your undivided attention. Minister, I congratulate you. I know that you will make Jamaica proud, and I know that you will make the ACP proud. I know that there can be some difficulties negotiating with the EU, but you are equal to the task. And if there is any assistance at all I can give to you, I will.
On that warm and fuzzy note, the question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? The Senate now stands adjourned.
We found ourselves traveling through the accents of music